This car is the most honest car you ever see.
It's been a dream ever since I've had it.
The first time I heard that engine screaming, I thought, I gotta have one of those.
For me, the cars have personality.
What's great about a BMW Classic is the community that surrounds it.
When you listen to that, that's why we're here.
Welcome to Classic Heart, the BMW Group Classic podcast. My name is JP and our guest today is Charlie Cooper. And yes, it is Cooper like in Mini Cooper. Charlie is the fourth generation of the famous Cooper family. Thanks to them, the Mini became what it is today. A brand with the most legendary history in rally sport, incredible wins like Monte Carlo, and the typical go-kart feeling. Welcome, Charlie, to our little podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The name Cooper creates so many positive memories with people, but it's burning under my nails one question. The name you carry is very famous in the mini world and beyond the mini world, in the racing world and beyond the racing world. Has this ever had influence on your personal life?
Talking of influence on my life, it sort of starts even in my first name. So Charles Cooper was the founder of the Cooper Car Company. He was my great-grandfather, who I was named after. So yes, it's been such a big part of my life. It's strange because growing up, people have often asked me, what's it like growing up with your grandfather being John Cooper? Obviously, when I was young, he was still alive. I even went to Formula One Grand Prix with him, and it just seemed normal. It's not like it was anything special. Maybe I took it for granted. Sadly, he passed away in 2000, my grandfather. And I always ask my father so many questions now that I kind of wish, when I was a young boy that I asked my grandfather. But it's just been part of my life growing up.
I mean, for someone looking from the outside, it sounds very special. But I think internally, is it right to say that you guys are just a normal, ordinary family?
Yeah, I mean, we think so. If we go back all the way to kind of Formula One days when Cooper was successful in Formula One,
yeah,
they always said the Coopers were very down to earth. I mean, the biggest thing was that they weren't a particularly wealthy family, which was strange even then in Formula One. And they were the ultimate challengers. They were a group of guys sort of started by my great-grandfather and my grandfather that loved motor racing, loved cars, and had this passion for it and made it happen, regardless of the amount of money they had.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was known for being a bit of a joker, very down to earth. There was a quote from, I forget which mechanic it was in the 60s that said, someone asked him what it's like working for Cooper. And they said, well, they probably pay the least in Formula One, but you're going to have the most fun. So I think, it's kind of an attitude I take to life is if you're not having fun, what's the point in doing it?
So your father, Mike, does he share also stories? Because I think you were very, very young the time your grandfather was alive. So you might not remember stories that have been told, more like things that happened together. Like, I think there's also a photo of you together in the first Mini Cooper.
I do remember growing up in the South Coast with the garages that my grandfather and father started, where they kind of relaunched the Mini Cooper as well. Mm-hmm. I think lots of people forget Mini Cooper disappeared through the 70s. And I do remember when I was very young in the 80s and 90s, when I was a young boy, obviously in my school holidays, kind of running around the garages, all these kind of boxes of Mini Cooper parts. And it was a special time, I think. I speak to my father because he gives me stories about, the history of Cooper back then was starting to be forgotten. And he kind of took it on himself with my grandfather to bring Cooper back to the mini masses. And there's a big story in how Cooper came back, which I don't think it's been told too much.
Yeah, maybe you can share some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, in the 70s, for whatever reason, Cooper kind of came away from mini. It didn't become, how should I say this? It stopped being a production model on the production line for mini. I think there was a car called the 1275 GT, which kind of became the sportier version of the mini. And through the 80s, there was still a demand for people that were restoring older cars that still wanted to have Cooper. And funny enough, Japan was the country that had the biggest demand. And they would often, they would often write, mini clubs in Japan would write to my grandfather, would come and visit. And my father had, much like my grandfather did in the 50s and 60s, had this entrepreneurial spirit and thought, well, hold on, why don't we start making aftermarket kits for people that buy new minis? so they can convert them into a Cooper. We give them the seal of approval. And they created these aftermarket kits for Mini owners in the 80s where they could convert their Mini to a Mini Cooper. I remember this sort of vaguely when I was very small, but they made these beautiful wooden boxes because I had one in my bedroom that had hand-painted Cooper with a picture of the Mini. I think my father seems to joke that at that time it wasn't a great business venture because he spent so much on the boxes, it cut into his margin for the kits that he was selling. But no, the Japanese market absolutely loved them. I think much like the story of Cooper at the start, they expected to sell a few hundred and had demand for thousands, which in turn, I think my father and my grandfather went to speak to Rover after they kind of said, well, what are these kits? And they said, this is incredible. Why don't we bring Cooper back onto the production line, which happened in the 90s.
How was the involvement of Cooper in the production line back then? So was it like, how were the cars produced when they were under the Rover banner still?
So as far as I know, there was input from the Cooper team about what should be done, how to get the extra horsepower. Funnily enough, anyone who's into classic mini racing now will know of Swift Tune engineering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a big history of my father and my grandfather working with Swift Tune. They even, they went to Swift Tune for advice. They worked with Swift Tune. So those Coopers were developed by the Cooper family. And, even through to the special editions. I mean, Mini has a long history of special editions, but through the 90s, there was a lot of Cooper special editions. Even the last classic Mini off the production line was a Cooper Sport. I seem to remember, red Cooper Sport. So a lot of involvement, a lot of input into the engineering.
Can we just jump a bit further back? Because, it's interesting to understand what your great-grandfather founded and ending up in being very successful in single-seater racing. And then how did this come together with the Mini? So where is the link? Why from a single-seater race car going into a production car, make it faster, tune it, as we use this bad word?
The link was Alec Isigonis. So obviously the design, he was the link. And my grandfather, John, he frequently would go to what they called the Brighton Speed Trials in the south coast of the UK, where he would race in a straight, it was just a speed trial, as it says, in a straight line down near the beach. And he raced against Alec Isigonis and became very friendly with him. And obviously Alec went on to design the Mini, which, as we all know, was supposed to be a small family car that was created, the brief was a reaction to the oil crisis almost, to say, look, let's make a sustainable, it's crazy to think back in the 50s and 60s, the brief was something sustainable back then.
Yes.
And it was never designed to be raced, but the actual engineering in the car, I think my grandfather saw it when he looked at the designs and saw one of the first ones, wheels at each corner, the perfect balance, transverse layout as well. He thought, well, this might, actually handle it. And I think the first time he drove it, he had kind of a spark in his head. And Alec Isigonis lent him an early car.
Wow.
So the story goes that my grandfather was lent an early prototype of the Mini, and he took it down to the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. And he thought, like I said, he thought this was going to be a great car to drive. But he wanted some of the drivers to kind of reinforce that, some of the Formula One drivers. And back then, on the Thursday and Friday, it wasn't like nowadays where it's very rigid, they have practice sessions on a Friday in Formula One. The drivers would just get a local hire car and drive around the circuit to see what the track was like, if anything had changed. The younger drivers would kind of learn the circuit. And they used to take Fiat 500s back then. And it wasn't uncommon on a Thursday or Friday to see these Fiat 500s on their roof because the drivers were really pushing it, And my grandfather told me the story that he let them have a go in this Mini.
Yes.
And every single one of them said, this car's brilliant. It's just not enough power. It needs a bit better brakes. It handles like a dream for such a small car. It really surprised them. And I think that was the spark for him to say, hold on, we need to take this car racing. But I think the other kind of bit that reinforced it was, I'm trying to remember the driver who took it. It was an Aston Martin driver. He swapped the Mini for his Aston Martin and told one of his team to drive the Aston Martin and he'd drive the Mini. And they'd race from Italy after the race all the way back to the UK.
Yes.
And the legend is the Mini beat the Aston Martin back to the UK. So
that's kind of the, what for Bentley is the Blue Train story, is for you an Aston Martin racing driver.
Exactly.
The name we will add later.
Roy Salvadori.
Roy
that was it.
Salvadori, yes.
Yeah,
what a
famous
legend
driver.
as well. Famous, absolutely. Man, I think it's very interesting to see that, still Formula One influences, not only Formula One, but let's focus on that one, influences car developments as well. So much information flows over to the car production. And I love to hear the story that it has been the case also back in the 60s and something like this.
Obviously, things were a bit different back then. The drivers could get away with a lot more in their private, personal lives as well. So I think it was definitely a different time. But in terms of the influence it had, it was even more extreme than it was today. Back then, something could happen one year and it'd be in the road cars the next year.
Exactly.
And I think the biggest example in change and how quickly it could happen was probably the rear engine revolution, which was obviously putting the engine in the back. Which, it sounds very simple, but it was a huge revolution for the automotive industry.
Yeah, massively. I think also it's very important always to state that, yes, it is called the golden age. And yes, we have to celebrate the heydays and like the coolness and everything we love about it. I mean, you have your own experience as well in vintage racing, right?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to race classic vintage cars in the historic races, as well as modern cars.
Yeah.
In sprint races, endurance racing.
So in modern cars, what are you racing at the moment?
Primarily minis. So modern John Cooper Works minis.
Yeah.
Obviously race spec, so they're slightly different to the road cars, but based on the road cars. In the mini challenge and, like I said, in endurance racing. But the historics, we have our own race car that we run with Swift Tune that me and my father kind of run in places like Goodwood. And the beauty of the modern Mini is that you can see the DNA in the way it drives to the classic Mini.
Yeah.
So that go-kart handling, which is used a lot in marketing, but it's spoken about, it's genuine. The car does handle like the classic. But the classic is obviously a lot rawer. And getting in a classic Mini Cooper and racing it is such a unique experience. I mean, okay, let me describe it as in kind of how I've seen others describe it or their reaction. So my first race at Goodwood was in 2017 with BMW Classic. They own a number of minis, yeah.
It's not that long time ago, actually.
No, that's my first one. I've driven around Goodwood, but it's my first time racing there, actually. It was only sort of 5-6 years ago. And my co-driver in the Mini Cooper was Jörg Müller, who's a famous, he used to be a BMW factory driver, raced at Le Mans, multi-class winner. And he's used to driving 1,000 horsepower cars. He was an F1 reserve driver, the fastest cars on the planet. And he got in this 130 horsepower max Mini Cooper going around Goodwood. And he came out and he was smiling after his first few laps, just trying it out. And he said, that's some of the most fun I've ever had in a race car. Now, that kind of describes, you don't have to have all the power in the world. The Mini just lets you experience fun. And it's really seat of your pants, kind of, you're always on the edge in a Mini. Well, you feel like you're in the edge. So, that's how I describe it.
I love that. I mean, that's, you can really imagine what it means to be in this tiny little car in between all the big, let's say, the big engine cars around you.
Where we drive against multi-car.
Exactly. You see like this big Fairlanes driving against a Mini. And I mean, this David versus Goliath is a very nice, I mean, that's so exciting. And if you see like, okay, on a straight, the Mini has no chance at all against the big block engines, but how they dance around the corners, it's really like a ballet thing. I mean, it's really like a rhythm. So,
the problem is now, so obviously there's very strict historic regulations, but there's always, technology always plays away. Like the Minis now are faster than they were in the 60s. The problem is the big V8s, they've managed to, within the regulations, so they're not cheating, but they've managed to find a way to brake a bit better than they did back in the period. Yes. So unfortunately, the big V8s, they managed, the brakes sustained through the whole race, even a sprint race of 30 minutes. Yes. So the Minis can't quite compete, but they can when it rains. And unfortunately, I haven't had a wet race at Goodwood yet. It's funny because everyone loves Goodwood in the sun, except the Mini racers, because they want it to rain, because they know they've got a chance in the rain.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But nevertheless, as we said, like regulations allow to change that. And I mean, also like our own team, the Classic Driver team, we will run a Holman Moody Fairlane. And of course, also the specs were like up to the limit of what was legal to do. And so, of course, they were much better at that time. But as soon as there's a drop of rain, forget about it. Have you ever also looked into rally sport? Because, I mean, Mini has a big history in rally sport as well.
No, I mean, I've been around dirt tracks with Minis, but it's something I'd like to do. But, I mean, I have such respect for rally drivers.
Yeah.
I think they're almost, you say they're a different breed almost.
Yes.
The interest,
non-human anymore.
It seems the rally drivers, their skill translates across all sorts of driving.
Yeah, these guys are really like, out of this world. I remember I had a layover because of a delayed flight with the rally professor. So, and a typical Finn, he was not very not talking too much actually. And I asked him the question around, so we speak about Rauno Aaltonen.
Yeah.
And I asked him, Rauno, why are rally drivers from Finland especially good? And actually, why are Finns so good in non-team sports in a sense? And his answer was, Philip, Finland is a great country and we have lots of space. So every man needs to work on his own. So that's why we're good in this. And has to defend his household. And so that was the reason why. I think it's a very nice way of saying nothing at the end, but they are very special. But I mean, he loves Mini and he knows Minis inside out, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was in Belgium doing an event for Mini with Rauno, and I think he's in his 80s now.
Yes, must be, yeah.
Yeah, he was doing passenger laps all day long without finishing. He wasn't even sweating at the end, and I was doing them. I was doing them in my Mini race car, and I was knackered by the end of the day, and he looked less tired than I did. So
we can learn also a lot from the older generation.
Exactly.
So I think already it is clear that the question, how did your family legacy influence your life, or your personal life, is answered on a certain extent. But do you think you would have been also choose somehow of a profession with the automotive world without the name Cooper?
It's a strange one, actually, because so I was obviously out of university. I worked with my father when he was doing John Cooper Works at the start. So the kind of tuning manufacturer, as it was then, of Mini.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting time. I was involved in all sorts. So, my claim to fame a little bit with the John Cooper Works is that I sketched one of the first logos.
Oh, wow.
But I did. There was definitely a designer behind that made it look more professional, but I kind of sketched out some of the early ones. But I went off and kind of left the family business, let's call it, just to go and pursue a career in marketing. And the funny thing is, you say, did you do it to kind of escape the automotive world? And not through my own choice. I ended up working on another car brand in marketing for the ad agency that I worked at. It was Renault. Yeah. So I actually ended up working for Renault purely by coincidence. So I couldn't kind of escape it. So maybe it's a sign that I was always meant to be working in mobility, let's say.
The legacy had followed you and you chose the path you went to. So what are you doing now, actually, Charlie?
So I split my time between, so obviously I'm still racing. I'm very much a gentleman driver, but I seem to be putting more and more cars and expected to go a bit faster, but I definitely claim to be a gentleman driver. So I split my time as an ambassador with Mini, which is great. I meet Mini fans, help with product launches, tell the Cooper story as well. Yeah. And I've had a good relationship with a number of years with Mini doing that. And at the same time, I started a bicycle and e-bike brand. We actually started it a long time ago, but it's really kind of taken off with our partners who do most of the day-to-day running of it in Germany, funny enough, where the bikes are produced. But I had a passion for bicycles and e-bikes for a long time. So I kind of took the Cooper name to bicycles and e-bikes.
And we have to mention BMW Group Classic did also a video about you and your father in their series, Our Brands, Our Stories, which is called Celebrating an Iconic Duo. You find this on YouTube. So everyone who's have a look at the BMW Group Classic channel and you will find it. In that video, there's also one of your bikes featured. And to me, with this sheer aluminium look, it reminded me remarkably on the single-seaters of the 30s and the 40s. Is this where you take inspiration from?
Yeah, I think the bike you're referring to, we did a few years ago a collaboration with the English fashion brand Hackett.
Could be,
And that
yes.
and that was a bike we did. Funny enough, that was inspired by Spitfires.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
Also a British legend.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't claim to be a traditionally trained designer, but I love taking inspiration from the past. You know, I designed a lot of the bikes. I've had input into certain projects with Mini as well over the years. And I think using the past to inspire the future is the best way. Don't just completely look at the past and say we have to go back to that, but using it as inspiration is the way forward for best design, definitely.
Yeah. And now there's a new chapter with this like electrified bikes as well. And I read some reviews. They compare it to like lots of F1 components. So is that true, or is that just someone saying something about the brand?
Maybe a little bit of marketing. They do have regenerative braking. So the KERS system, let's call it, which like I think I mentioned it and came through F1. So there is technology. The battery technology is moving so fast across the board, which I think is driven by the automotive sector.
Yeah.
So because there's such a push, and we know the Mini brand is going all electric by 2030. But there's a push for more efficient batteries, smaller batteries, lighter batteries. So it has a knock-on effect in terms of, you know, smaller industries, in terms of, let's say, money available. It's going to have a knock-on effect. So I think that the bicycle industry, and e-bike sector definitely take on things that happen in the automotive industry. And I think the biggest thing is going to be batteries as well.
Yeah. I think because they're the heavy load on a bike at the moment. You know, I live in Zurich, which is very like hilly. So you need to go up and down a foot. So an e-bike makes perfect sense. But I wasn't happy with all the bikes I was testing. And so I just kept my own little old style Parsley bike. So I have this one.
Lovely.
And driving there with the 3-speed menu, which might sometimes force me to get off the saddle because I don't get up the hill. That's the horrible truth, everyone. But still, I think there are good things happening around there. Jumping back to your grandfather, do you think he would be very like approve what Mini is now?
100%. Yeah, I have got asked this in the past, and I think people are like, oh, well, you know, he was into motor racing. What does that mean? I think about sustainability, I think we spoke about the Mini being a car ahead of its time in the 60s. Yes. He himself was into sustainability before it was, I wouldn't say fashionable, because it's important for all of us. It's not just a fashion. You know, we have to think about the future of the planet. It wasn't sustainable. It was a different type of sustainability. It was about, one, saving money, but also making things last. So running a small team, there would be no waste. So they'd reuse everything. But also in terms of looking at efficiencies, he thought it was better to create something light and better handling than it was to just go for pure horsepower. Yeah. You know, that was the opposite of Ferrari at the time. Enzo Ferrari famously said it's all about the engine that pulls the driver along. But he was more about lightweight, efficiency. He thought there was a future in hydrogen powered cars as well, which we see BMW invest a lot in hydrogen. Yes. I think there's big questions for the whole automotive industry of what the future is going to look like. But I think he would have embraced it. Absolutely. He wouldn't have shied away and say, oh, this is, you know, being one of those petrol heads who said, oh, I hate electric cars. He would have absolutely loved it. And my father too, he has his Mini Cooper Special Anniversary Edition, modern car, but he also has an i4. And he said for his daily driver, he won't go back from an electric. He loves it. So I think my grandfather would have been the same. He would have absolutely embraced it.
And I mean, this is always the spirit with those who are entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship is like in the DNA of your family, in my opinion. Today, we would call you guys very successful startup guys. Your great-grandfather, Charles Cooper, with the Cooper Car Company. Your grandfather, John Cooper, with his Formula One engagement and the racing cars. They were so much ahead of their time. And in a sense, they still influence the Mini brand today. And also, I think that's what I heard. Is it true that you might be the only family that races in Goodwood for over 4 generations? Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. We asked the Duke of Richmond, because we thought their family had, and he said that no, his father never raced. So they had 3 generations. Because I know Lord March, Charlie March, who races, is a great race driver as well. Just does it as a hobby
as well.
No, he doesn't race Mini. He races, his main thing I think he races is his Jag E-Type.
Okay, got it.
Which after a Mini would be my number 1 classic car, I'd have to say.
Fair. No, but jump back. So it's 4 generations. Do
Four
you feel some
generations.
pressure?
I've always loved motorsport, and I never did it when I was a kid. I did have a go-kart because one, I was better at rugby. So I kind of, my spare time was spent playing rugby in between studying. And I did feel pressure when I was younger, but weirdly, as you get older, you start to care less about that and you just do things because they're fun.
Yeah.
And so there is there's always pressure when you're driving a car because you've got to concentrate, and it's, it's still a dangerous sport. But, there's definitely no pressure there, I don't think, anymore. There would have been when I was younger, but I probably looked at it in a different way.
Yeah. And how would you describe the Goodwood track? I mean, it's very narrow, right?
I mean, there's very few circuits like it in the world. It's super fast. It's as it was in period, so it's dangerous. You have to pay attention.
Yeah.
I had a little brush with the barrier last year in the St Mary's Trophy. Unfortunately, it's on YouTube, I think. But
so everyone look this up, please.
Oh God, don't! Yeah, it's embarrassing. The how would I describe it? It's flat, almost flat out the whole way. It's such a fast circuit.
Yeah.
And it seems very simple. If you looked at a circuit map, or you'd think, oh, there's not that many corners. It's quite simple.
Yeah.
It's not. There's so many nuances to going fast around there. And I think I've done hundreds of laps there and I still haven't quite nailed it.
So I think it needs a lot of training. And I think if you see what Nick Swift is doing in the Mini, always, I mean, he's always the winner, let's face it, right? He's always there. It seems like that he has this track in his heart and his pocket. And as we said, also like for racing, a Mini there is the perfect car. Some people might not think that is true racing in Goodwood. Would you agree to that?
Oh, there's definitely racing. I mean, it always amazes me. So, I mean, all classic cars, they're not cheap, they're expensive, and it's an expensive hobby to race classic cars. But when it's a different level, when you, there's a race on the Friday night, often at the Goodwood Revival, where some of the most beautiful, some of them one-off Ferraris and it's Jaguars. These are millions of pounds, euros, dollars, whatever, cars. And you think they're just doing a procession, but they're racing. They're wheel to wheel. And in the hands of ex-Formula 1 drivers, current Formula E drivers, endurance racers, those guys still want to win when they get in those cars. And the owners do as well. So, there's no holding back. The Duke always does a talk to the drivers before the weekend on the Thursday.
Yeah.
And he says, look, we've run this event since 99, I think the first one was. And it's a dangerous circuit, so you can't have accidents. And you have to drive a certain way so that we can keep this event going. So I think there's a bit of that in your head, but the majority of people on that circuit will still want to win.
Yeah, not at all costs, as we say, because racing is a dangerous sport, as it also lovely says in the back of every ticket at Goodwood. Yeah, it says, "Be aware, it's a dangerous sport." Yeah, and it can be. I mean, I think it was a Lotus Climax who flew into the tunnel and stuff like this. So there can always things happen, but I think they find the perfect balance of keeping the excitement for both the drivers and the spectators, and don't go crazy about it. And I think also there will be, do you have the feeling that there's a regulation between the drivers? Is someone going too wild and say, come on, from experienced drivers, take it slowly, shift back a little bit? Is there like a self-control in between the drivers, Equipe?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Again, one of the beauties of Goodwood is owners getting the chance to share their cars with famous faces, like incredible pro drivers. I've been lucky enough to race with Karun Chanduk, who's a F1 pundit. He's on our TV screens in the UK all the time. And there's kind of this, it's a good feeling, good banter. Everyone's there having fun. But there's definitely a respect and kind of, maybe some of the less experienced drivers are given kind of tips and helped out along the way. So
the camaraderie is still big there, right? Like in the former days.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, even my first race, I remember Jörg, he wasn't experienced at racing a Mini or a classic Mini, definitely. But he's a professional and he can be fast in anything. He got in. So he gave me a lot of tips. That was my first race at Goodwood. We didn't have the fastest car. I know the guys in the classic team, they've managed to get Swifty on the engines now. So the cars are a lot quicker. Yeah. But we didn't have a Swift-tuned engine back then. So we were at a disadvantage even on the start line. But we came midfield in the end, which was incredible. So,
I mean, let's face it. In Goodwood, you can see a Ford GT40 and you see another GT40 with the same skilled drivers, and you see which one is original and which has been, again, in between the boundaries of the legal activities you can do and the safety regulations, which has been done. So if you start with an original, at Goodwood Revival still, even though it's an entertaining event for everyone, racing is taken serious. And so the people, as we said, they want to win. So if you have an original car with an original engine, you have to be a damn good driver. And the other one in the bit worked on cars, again, legal requirements all fulfilled, then you have no chance. Full stop.
What still stands true, though, is if you have an amazing engineer working on the cars or kind of input into the cars, they can still make them a lot faster.
If you go the extra mile, you really have the chance to make your car super quick, getting paired with the right drivers, and here you have the cigar at the end of the race, right? Again, this makes also this so very exciting and so very, let's say, modern in the sense, even though we're speaking about a revival, right? The excitement level is absolutely there. And I mean, also on the revival, these guys with their pre-war cars, and not speaking about Type 35 Bugattis, I'm speaking about brands I never heard in my life.
Yeah.
And they look like coaches with a little engine in it. And what these guys are doing, maybe chain driven as well, like the drivetrain is a chain, that's absolutely incredible. And this makes, I mean, they say glorious Goodwood, and I think it's absolutely fair to say so. It's absolutely amazing. So everyone tuned in and haven't been there, go there. And I'm looking forward just in a couple of days flying to the UK and start my season with the members meeting, which I think is for everyone who doesn't like big events, for them who's like the mass of the revival is too big, try to find a member and get you invited to the members meeting, because that's the small revival and it's also very joyful. Lots of racing and driving as well.
Yeah, no, great fun.
Absolutely. It's very important also to speak about what makes a Cooper in your sense of your idea. So what is the lovely thing about a Cooper?
So the Cooper has to have that racing DNA.
Yes.
So it started from racing. It was a passion for racing and competition. So the Mini Cooper wouldn't have existed unless my grandfather thought this car could go racing. So I think that's still really important. We see the Mini Challenge, the modern cars all around the world. Like I said, I raced the car at the Nürburgring. We did a pace setter with Mini that was a safety car for racing. So I think that racing DNA, but also it's kind of a sprinkle of something special.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, I don't know how you describe it, like special kind of potion on the car that gives it. But it is also, it's a feeling that this car is special. And I think everyone that has a Mini Cooper has, it puts a smile on your face, whether it's the driving characteristics. Yeah. I don't think there's a car in the world where there's so many sold that still makes people smile and smile at each other.
Yes.
And, Mini Cooper drivers still wave at each other. And I think the fact that what Mini was supposed to be at the start is so different to what you would have said Cooper and Cooper Formula One was. But the fact the two came together, sort of opposites attract, is kind of very similar to how the Mini brand is still today. So many people love Minis. So many different types of people. It appeals to so many different types of people. Complete petrol heads still love Minis because they're great handling cars. They take the Nürburgring after all the M cars and AMG cars. The next most popular car is probably a Mini. Yeah, because it's people can take R53s, R56s and tune them up and still have a great track car. And at the same time, you have people using their electric Mini who couldn't care less about racing. Yes. Who don't really want to own a car, but they need one. And they think that, they want something good for the environment. So they buy an electric Mini. And these two, you'd think, are complete opposites, yet they can still buy into the same brand. And I think part of that is because Cooper's involved. And that's kind of taken one extreme. Ali Kisigonis with the design of the Mini was the other, and brought the two together, which still hands true today. And, it's funny, like I said, we're still involved in what does racing mean for Mini nowadays? And, we do have to have sensible conversations about sustainability and what that means. But you've still got to have that spirit in the brand. And without it, it becomes like another electromobility brand. And I think that's why Mini still exists, where other brands have disappeared throughout the years, because it brings in so many different facets. So many different people can buy into the brand and love it. That's beautiful. I think that's a very nice description of what it is. And I mean,
I've been once to Mini United in Sanford. I think that was the first time I met your father, actually. And I was so buffed by the way people are celebrating. Groups coming from Italy driving to Sanford in their minis, modern yet old ones, so classic ones. The buzz around your father when he was giving his autographs, I mean, it was amazing to see, and majority young people. And I think that's the secret. I think Mini is a very young brand, also in terms of the young customers. And I think the special thing on Mini customers is that these are young people who love history, who like the history of the cars. As I said, the way they were surrounding your father by giving autographs there at Sanford, it was crazy. And people coming from Ukraine, they came from everywhere around the world. There was one team driving from India, 2 cars from India to Sanford. So they started 2 months earlier to just drive down that with their modern minis. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. So how would you describe the feeling being connected to this kind of passion? Does this also carry you through sad days in a sense?
Yeah. I'm going to have to say, my talking about the signature, my father, I don't know if this was by design, but his signature, because his first name's John Cooper. Obviously, he goes by Michael Cooper. Is exactly the same as my grandfather, John Cooper's. So maybe people like his signature because it looks like my grandfather's. I mean, I'm joking in part because my father's been such an important part of Mini and Mini Cooper still existing today. And weirdly, this is totally not by design. My signature is almost identical to my great grandfather's, which was weird anyway. Sorry, I went off track. What was your question about
the question was like, I mean, do you feel a responsibility also in a sense? Because like a name can also be a burden because it's a responsibility you have, right? Yeah,
I feel I'm very privileged and lucky to be working with Mini BMW Group. But I also feel like part of my role with them is being kind of the Cooper agitator, a bit like my father did with John Cooper Works, my grandfather did with BMC and the original Mini. It's very easy within a big corporate structure for things just to go along a path. And I think someone needs to come in and agitate a little bit, which is, I have great relationships with people across the business from engineering, design, the marketing team, which is obviously my main link. But I do think there's a role of coming and saying, hold on a moment, why don't you guys do this? Try this. And I think that's hopefully something that can make Mini continue to be special in the future.
I'm sure it will. And I think it's very good to have someone like an ambassador being so connected with that brand. I think that's very important and make it also feel real. So what are you driving today?
So, I mean, my daily driver is I ride an e-bike day to day because I live in London.
Yes. But
as a family, I've got a young daughter. So we have a Countryman John Cooper Works.
Nice.
And I mean, on special occasions, I get out in it's a Mark II Cooper S in red, which has been in the family for years. So 1967, I think it is.
Wow.
So I get that out when it's a nice day at the weekend sometimes.
Is that all in the south of England or?
In the south of England, yeah, just around London. So my parents live near a place called Arundel on the south coast. So and my father has a lovely collection, which there's some of the cars would have been on Our Brands film.
Yes.
So yeah, there's a nice selection of cars we can take out.
Nice. Again, we can only recommend to have a look at this, also to see your father. And I didn't actually know that his name is not Mike. That's
John Michael Cooper. Yeah.
But I really like it. So it also shows us a bit of sense of independency to not go by John and going by Michael then.
Yeah. But I was going to say I can't stress enough, actually, my father, I mean, I joke around about him, but he was so instrumental in bringing the Cooper name back.
Yeah.
And, the next generation of Minis all have Cooper on them, and it wouldn't be that way if it wasn't for him. Before the John Cooper Works brand, bringing the Cooper back to the classic Mini was down to him with my grandfather, but also then launching John Cooper Works, which is an amazingly successful sub-brand of Mini.
Yeah, absolutely. When did that change happen, actually?
The change to John Cooper Works?
Yeah.
My grandfather obviously died in 2000, so he saw the kind of final iteration of the new Mini. But I think my father saw the new Mini and was obviously still involved with BMW Group as the transition from Rover happened. But he saw an opportunity, one, to take the car racing and make it accessible to lots of people. So he wanted to make an affordable form of racing. So he started the Mini Challenge, or what was the John Cooper Challenge. But also he saw an opportunity to kind of make these cars even more special again, much like my grandfather did with the original Mini. So
Yes.
I think that's how John Cooper Works started. The John Cooper Works project started at the Nürburgring at the 24-hour race. So my father took a team to race an R53 to the Nürburgring to race there, and was kind of the real impetus behind the John Cooper Works brand.
Wow. Good. I mean, things could happen on the racetrack. Good things happen on the racetrack.
Exactly.
So, Charlie, what's next for you? What's coming ahead?
So, I mean, with Mini, there's an incredible amount of activity happening over the next, as you can imagine, sort of year and so. It's already announced in the press that there's lots of new models coming through. It's a big, I think it's going to be a big 2 years for the Mini brand, as big as the brand relaunching in sort of 2000, which is really exciting. Lots of projects in electromobility and in the bike world. There's things happening which I'm working on. So I'm definitely keeping myself busy. And there's also, I've mentioned the race a few times. There might be an endurance race that I might be doing.
Oh, really?
Coming up, yeah. Not announced yet, though. So
No, but that's great news. So we need to look out for that as well. I mean, that's fantastic. I think you can't share any more about this here. But where is the next opportunity to meet you at the racetrack?
So the next time I'm very lucky again to be racing. I'll be in Korea, South Korea. They have a kind of, I wouldn't say race series. It's where people can take their road cars and kind of do timed laps. So I'll be participating in their kind of mini challenge there. And then also later next month, I'll be in Japan where there is a mini challenge. So I can say that I'll be racing in the Japanese mini challenge in a John Cooper Works on Fuji circuit. So incredible circuit with a big history. So I'll be there. Yeah, I'll post it on my social media so that people can know.
You mentioned just Asia, and I think also that Japan played also a big role in the way to revive the brand. How would you describe the Mini culture in Japan?
So Japan is unique in Asia because I think they have such a rich history with Mini Cooper. I mean, I go to South Korea where they love Mini as well. They love Mini Cooper, but it doesn't have such a long history like it does in Japan. And funny enough, it goes back even before Mini Cooper days, the link between Cooper and Japan. So the founder of Honda was friendly with my grandfather. And when he wanted to get into Formula One, he kind of lent on my grandfather for advice. He bought I think it would have been a T53 Formula One car off Cooper to kind of base the development of the first Honda cars. I think one of the only non-Honda cars in the Honda Museum is a Cooper Formula One car.
Really? I mean, that's a big honor, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Honda, what a famous brand in motorsport, but in just the automotive world, took a lot of inspiration from Cooper. So I think that's kind of the start of the relationship with the brands and Japan. But then they have an absolute obsession with Mini and Mini Cooper. They have a big love for British brands as well. I mean, I know Mini have done collaborations with Paul Smith in the past. The same is true with Mini. There's so many absolutely passionate fans in Japan.
I mean, that's also crazy because I think the car culture in Japan is very so rich in variety as well, like from these crazy modifications they do, like exhausts everywhere and wings everywhere and things. And then also keeping everything so clean and pure as possible and creating a time cup. So I think these both ends are so interesting in that car culture. Charlie, we have a little thing that's called like the service part in our podcast. So for someone who would like to jump into the Mini Cooper world, which would you recommend as a vintage one to buy? Which would be the one generation or the years you would recommend to look for that might be still affordable and not going like crazy overpriced? So we really can start your love for Mini Cooper if you want to go vintage.
I mean, the ultimate is to get a Mark 1 Cooper S, but when you say getting into that, that's, you think it's a Mini, but they're not cheap. But the 90s, kind of the last years of the Mini Coopers, they're still affordable. And let's be honest, it's the same chassis all the way since back to 59. So you're still getting a beautiful Mini Cooper. If you wanted something slightly different, you want to look at the which is a classic now, obviously the new Mini as it was, it's classified as a classic. And one thing I would say, if you get in, people who love classic cars, you may not be into track racing, but take a Mini on a track, even if you don't want, because you just get a completely different experience. And some of those early new generation, let's call it, but still classics now, the R53s were great track cars. So yeah, that would probably be my advice. Look at 90s, last generation kind of 90s Mini Coopers and the Mini Cooper Sport, the last kind of ones off the production line.
Perfect. Thank you very much for spending time with us and sharing a maxi story about the Mini. And it was absolutely fun to have you here. And we learned so much about what's going on with Mini. I think we're being good advocates for Goodwood as a celebration of the history.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Charlie Cooper. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.